If you talk about a typical life, we have only about 5,000 weeks. There are five aspects that push and pull and form what I'm calling the navigation compass for your journey. Right? Any guesses on what those are?
For example, if you're in a point in your life where, say, your personal needs, like you said, might take precedence, you've got some decisions to make that are there, but there's also the sort of this lingering guilt at the back, saying I'm not able to work on that cause as much, or put all of my time in a role that's meaningful. How would you navigate that?
I'm Vijay Raghavan Prabhakaran, and I have my colleague Vinusha Venkatesh here. We are all the core committee members of TFI's Alumni Collective of Tamil Nadu. The collective exists to keep alumni connected meaningfully. It's about creating a community where alumni find relevance through conversations, collaborations, and opportunities to contribute based on where each of us is today. With that, I warmly invite Girish Anand, our speaker for today, and I hand it over to him.
Thank you, Vijay, and thank you everyone for organizing this. So when Vijay reached out, I was like, he literally asked me, "What is one thing that you would like to talk about which would make your heart sing?" And I'm like, I have never been asked that question before. Uh, and I thought, and it was natural that what I wanted to somehow create this space around in this opportunity that I got was to talk about what it means to navigate our lives as we have the passion for the sector or the want to do good on one side and our life realities on the other. At the same time, the privilege that we know we carry and we don't quite know what to do with. So that's what I thought we could spend the next hour 15 minutes on. So my career began at McKinsey and Company, a strategy consulting firm. So I spent 4 years, 4.5 years there. From there, one of the pro bono projects that I had done was with this organization called People. I fell in love with the work that they were doing, and I joined them full time. Here, the transition for another 4 years was the transition from being a mid-level project manager to an organization leader, and that was quite the learning journey for me. At one point, 2 3 years in, there was this question saying, okay, now I know what it means to have power to a certain degree, where stuff that I'm saying is impacting 300,000 teachers and a crore of children. And then the question becomes, am I wielding it meaningfully? And so I ended up wanting to take a sabbatical when I could. And so I went on a career break. That went on for a year. And during that year, I somehow ended up starting this identity called Raahi Impact. It began with a YouTube channel called Raahi Impact Journeys. And about a year in, I also joined Dalberg Advisors. So this is a development sector consulting firm that works globally. It has an office in Mumbai and Delhi. So I joined them as well. So somewhere a midpoint between the McKinsey and the People, where I'm still working in the development space in problems that I care about in the format of a consulting firm. So this has been my journey. And with this, it's been a decade of trying to make sense of exactly these questions that you mentioned in the chat, which is how do you balance your desire to have a net positive social impact with the life that you also want to live? So that's the space that I'm going to be coming from. And what I want to start off before we even get into the topic is this. An anchoring realization that if you talk about a typical life, a lifespan, we have only about 5,000 weeks, right? Now, that is a lot, but also not a lot. So if you just talk about 5,000 weeks, 35,000 days, 50% of that time actually goes into your daily routines. Cooking, sleeping, eating, all of that takes up just 50% at least of that. Another 20% you already have crossed with your childhood, which actually leaves the remaining what I'd call discretionary time, right? And this 30% of time is what you can use for everything else that you want to do, which is your career, your pet projects, your personal life, right? Anything that you do to that makes you who you are, that determines what sort of individual you are and your expression comes from just that much time. Now, in that time, each of us chooses to spend that time in different ways. So, what I would say, and this is a very rough sketch, but I would say there are people who would choose to spend that time largely in a self-focused way. For them, there is personal goals, there's stability, day-to-day life that they want to focus on. Social issues feel distant or occasional, like it comes, it goes, it doesn't really matter. And my interests are orthogonal to social issues largely. I am interested in gaming. I'm interested in things that I find, I'm interested in timing the markets and I find that intellectual pursuit interesting. Nothing wrong with that. But largely, this is one type of people. At the other end of the spectrum, you have those I would call mission oriented, who dedicate their life to a cause. That entire discretionary time is spent towards, organizing, advocacy, doing social work, often actively challenging the status quo, usually also at personal risk to themselves. And very often you come face to face with societal problems on an ongoing basis, and it's often driven, this choice of life is driven by lived experiences, and it is often just natural extension of what they have seen to do what they are doing. And then we have the third category. And this is what I would characterize as what we call the social sector folks, who are not entirely focused on themselves and at the same time are not willing to give up everything that the creature comforts that they have grown up used to. They question the status quo. They will put up that LinkedIn post or that Facebook status or update their DP, but they aren't ready to go to jail for their beliefs at the moment. And usually these folks are those who learn about issues secondhand, right? And they haven't necessarily been on the side of oppression, but they want to do better even though they are part of it. And this is largely driven by their conscience. Today's conversation, just to set it up, is for folks in the middle, right? There is nothing wrong with moving across the spectrum, right? If you are spending your entire life, it is entirely your choice what you would like to do. Given our predisposition, there will be folks who are in the middle, and today's conversation is for them. What I thought we could talk about is these three things. Right? First, essentially, what I hope to do is share some perspectives of what a typical journey in the sector looks like, specifically, or what are the different journeys in the sector. Now, from that, if you want to choose your journey, give a sense of a framework for reflecting on it. And third is some reflections from this very short journey of mine so far around what are some of the things that I think really help us as we try to make the most of this discretionary time. So what we'll cover, 10 minutes broadly on what is the broad landscape of social impact, what I assess to be the different options you have in this journey. Second is how do you figure out your own personal journey? It's a simple framework that I think has been evolving over time. I've iterated it once more. So how do you choose yours from that landscape? Third is what can you do to have meaningful impact? And finally, let's open the floor for conversations. Starting with what is the landscape that of the social sector that we see. I want to start with saying that actually every entity has a social impact. Every organization is a social impact organization. All these organizations on the right are social impact organizations. All of you know this, but it was one of those ahas that I had a few years ago, which is, again, our definition of the social sector is a very limiting definition. If you ask the question, and the way to understand the nature, often a useful question to ask is, who does this, rather than is it good or bad, which is a very unidimensional way of thinking about it, ask the question, who does this work benefit, who does it harm? Because somebody always benefits, somebody always gets harmed. There are a subset of those organizations that that say that their work is focused on marginalized communities more squarely. It's centered on the planet or marginalized communities and trying to make it better in their definition of the term. And that is what we call the social sector, essentially. Now, if you anchor on those beneficiaries and the planet as who you are acting on, I guess I assess that there are three types of organizations that exist that do that. First is the doers, right? This can be for-profit or non-profit. And of course, there are also the doers who actually act on this, which is the government and corporates, but we usually do, and the academia, Vidya, especially to your point, all of these are doers who work on this. Then you have what I call the payers. You have CSR teams within corporates. You have national, international foundations there. You have high net worth individuals. These are people who have capital, financial capital, who fund these doers. And then you have the third category of intermediaries. Intermediaries are consulting firms, impact investors, incubators, accelerators, training organizations, capacity building organizations, an ecosystem of players who support, who are essentially in many ways lubricating this system, right? So, for example, when you help nonprofits work with each other, collectively work together, set up, creating the collective requires energy. So you become the flywheel supporting that. Or you have a payer who is asking the question, who should I fund? Or help me strengthen my operations to figure out the funding. And that's where these intermediaries play, right? And characteristics wise, if you look at it, doers, I would split them into two types. You've got grassroots players and systemic players. They are usually closer to the point of impact. So you have a larger exposure to the point of impact. Not the problem, however, the characteristic is that there are so many of them, it is hard to know who does good work, who does bad work, if I may, like, or who's attempting well and who's attempting not so well. And typically, because they are closest to the point of impact and farthest from the source of funds, you usually end up having the lowest salary ranges, especially across a lifetime, right? So what you would hear is that at the mid-level between a corporate and a non-profit, you have comparability of salaries typically. But the differentiation is that it's an exponential growth curve usually in for-profit setups, while in non-profit setups, it is often a plateauing range of salaries that you reach at the mid-level. So intermediaries, like I was sharing, they provide the lubrication for the system. What the value of working in an intermediary is that you get a wide angle view. The sort of problems that you will work on will keep changing because you're not tied to one cause or tied to one particular organization, but you are more distanced from the impact. You might usually work on project cycles or portfolios which keep changing every 1-2 years versus staying at it perseverantly for the long term. So you're limited neck on the line, as I call it, and limited continuity to the problems that you are solving. And in many ways, it is second-hand meaning making. You are not making sense of the lived experiences of the communities that you work for, but often the lived experiences of the organizations. Often you are absorbing things from conversations with experts, conversation with people who understand, and you have limited direct interface with communities. So it's important to, if you work there, also make sure you get enough exposure. And finally, how do payers work? Payers often are offshoots of people who've made a lot of money. So, which is to say, classic example might be Gates Foundation, which is built on the success of the Microsoft enterprise. And so, that's your classic example of a payer, right? So they have the source of funding coming from some other for-profit space. And they often, what is important to understand is it is often not starting with what is good work, but starting with their own thesis of impact. So they are like, I want to work on X and Y and Z in ABC geography. Who are the organizations who I can leverage to make this happen? There are organizations which just give funding and do nothing else, and they don't even want their name up on the website. And so the cycle is entirely about figuring out the right orgs. And there are organizations which take a much more partner orientation, who work with the organizations to strengthen that. So that's my quick sketch of what the sector looks like. I don't know how helpful it is, but the reason why I found this helpful is when I was stepping into the space of the social sector in a full-time capacity, it wasn't often easy to figure out what my options are. Right? You just hear a bunch of names, you know the 20 organizations whose names that you remember. But how do you categorize them? How do you understand what they do, where they operate? it's been an evolution over time. I first thought about the doers and the payers, and then the question became where do consulting firms lie, and then eventually the ecosystem intermediaries perspective came. Made sense to me. Let me pause before we move on to what does this translate to your choices. Does this overall make sense? If it does, thumb. If there's something you'd like to share, feel free to unmute and share. And Mansi, good to see you.
Hi. Firstly, great structure, I think, especially even in the beginning, of like the usual, then social impact and to the missionaries. I was like, I fall, I could see where I fall in and everything. And this was so very well documented and articulated. I was just wondering, for example, if somebody works in public policy, right? Or in research as well, right? They're not directly, for example, on ground. They're particularly maybe not doers, but where do you think they lie in? Do you think they lie in the second category then?
I I'm gonna Vidya, where do you think academia lies?
Hey,
As
Girish.
an academician.
Okay, so this is an interesting question and something that I've been pondering as well. So I'm in academia, Mansi. Nice to meet you. Uh, so I think as folks engaged in development research, we do have some insights to bring to the table, but I particularly am still figuring that way out. Uh, I would I would like to think we're somewhere in the middle of that spectrum where there is a lot of interest and deep intent in ensuring that the work is meaningful and it reaches the people we'd ideally like it to reach. But in terms of the whole ecosystem, I'm still figuring my way around that part. So that's where I would place development research in particular. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would add on to say I think it's either doer or intermediary depending on what you do, right? So for example, if you define your value of the research as I am amplifying voices that have not been heard, that would be closer to the doer because in some sense that is a direct shift that you are causing in their lives. But if your work might be one step away, which is saying I am researching on public policy around how, let's say, organization structures in social enterprises versus nonprofits is a topic of research, that is one step removed. You are closer, what I would say, to the intermediary step, where the characteristics of the job will look closer to what the intermediaries look like, where it's secondhand learning. It is not as much interface with the communities, etc., etc. So I think it would also depend specifically on what your research thesis and the work that is. But usually, I would think closer to intermediaries than the doers, and definitely not payers, as most people would agree. So.
Sure, thanks. And similarly, government roles also, all of them, I'm just seeing,
Yeah.
they can fit into different,
Yeah.
yeah.
And the categorization is meant to help form archetypes, not to say this is watertight how it is, because it is almost like a base on which to at least have a starting point. But thank you for that.
Thank you.
Now, if we turn to your own journey, all right, to your own choices that you are going to make, this is perhaps the heart of what I wanted to share, which is to say, now, if we take this assumption that we want to work in this space, I'm slowly centering on there are 5 things that matter, right? There are 5 aspects that push and pull and form what I'm calling the navigation compass for your journey, right? Any guesses on what those are?
This looks like those 4 points on the Ikigai spectrum, if you're familiar with that philosophy.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, there's obviously a compensation aspect of it, there's a passion aspect of it, there's what's useful for people. I don't know, I'm just taking a guess. This is what I would think of if I'm navigating career. So
Love it. Clear. I feel like it is intuitive to slowly coming together. I think everyone is seeing different versions of it. I tried my best to work with ChatGPT to find a nice, cute acronym that we could use, but it was all very stilted. So there is no acronym. We shall just go with whatever I felt is making the most sense. It begins with first choosing a cause. What do you care about? There are causes that you feel more strongly towards, and there are causes that you don't feel strongly towards. So as Vijay would say, what makes your heart sing would be what you center on. the question is, there are some people who say, I don't mind what the cause is. For me, it's about what my conscience is. Like, am I minimizing the harm that I'm doing and maximizing the good that I'm doing becomes my underlying choice, right? So yeah, it doesn't matter. The cause doesn't matter. There are people like that as well. So that's the first question that comes. So there are people who say that I will never work for a certain type of company. Like, I'll work in the corporate sector, but I'll never work for a certain type of company because that is, I care deeply about that particular aspect. There are more fundable causes and less fundable causes. Second is, once you kind of know what cause you want, second becomes, what is the role that you want to play? Do you want to be a data analyst working towards social sector or social sector adjacent problems? Or do you want to be working in a leadership support role? There are people who enjoy playing chief of staff, right? Because for them, they're like, I mean, there was a point of time where my journal reflection was that I'd make a fantastic second in command. I'm not very good at envisioning things, but I'm very good at translating somebody's vision into reality. That was my phase of, or that was my reflection at one point. And the third thing that I would say is the people. Who do you enjoy working alongside? Whose work do you think is worth amplifying? Whose values do you resonate strongly with? Right? Because at the end of the day, that entire portion of your life you're going to be spending with people like that. So what makes a journey worthwhile? So every workplace has its benefits, has and signature of the people that it attracts, right? So that becomes the next question that you have. And finally, the fourth one, which is the personal needs that you have. So there are people who have all of us have a certain amount of finances that we would need. There are people who have locational constraints, saying, I have to live in Delhi because my grandmom is there for the next few years, or I cannot live in Delhi because I get asthma. Right? I don't know why I keep dinging Delhi. Sorry about that. Or it's the most relatable example. Or there is a pollen allergy that you have in Bangalore. Let me be fair to cities. Or the fact that I need to be where my family is, so I have to live in Mohali. Right? And so I can only look for roles in Mohali. Or I have a child with special needs. I need to be in a place where there are schools that I could send the child to. So whatever your needs are they are real and not to be ignored, and you work within those constraints, right? So, or so there are many. I mean, I gave very stereotypical examples, but there are an incredibly vast number of examples you could pick from. Or it could be, and let me shift to not just underlying needs, but also aspirational needs. I would like to pursue a PhD, right? Because I just want to have a doctor title behind my name, and I need to do that I want to do that in Oxford. I've just had this fascination. So I will end up moving to London or that part of the world. Okay, so what do I do in a way that I can still continue to meaningfully add in? Right? It just is how it is. And finally, the thing that drives all of this is what some of you also put on chat. At the core, the push and pull of cause versus personal needs, role versus people, all of this is determined to a large degree by your values and your identities, right? Values, why? There are people who've been brought up to say that the social sector matters, which is why all of us are on this call, right? But you will also have certain values which are I will never work for a company that, that expressly makes society worse in a way that I understand. Or there will be like, I don't like urbanization, I will work against urbanization. So that cause is driven by the values that you hold, right? I think the weakest should have a voice. And hence somebody goes into journalism, choosing the role that they want to play. So that is number one, the values that you hold. And knowing those values is helpful to determine what fits best. And second is your identities. And I use the plural on purpose. Right? So Girish he is somebody who wants to have meaningful social impact, but he also wants to be a musician. And he also wants to be a good son. These are, for example, multiple identities which are competing for my discretionary time. Calling it out, being clear on what your identities are, then helps you to put time against it. Girish is a reader. So Girish needs to spend time reading to continue to be a reader, right? So that kind of, and it might be orthogonal to social impact, and that's okay, which is why all of us potentially are in the middle category. where we need to balance what we do. Right? And so these become the 5 things. Again, not rocket science, I understand, but somewhere a helpful starting point for reflection to say where is it that you are today and what are these dimensions that you need to reflect on. And of course, this will be an evolving choice. The reason I went on that sabbatical was because for me, this question was really important, that I have decided I don't want to be rich and I've decided I want to have meaningful social impact. But today the question is the work that I'm doing. So for example, these questions that you then start having, right? I have helped a tribal child to get into a government school, learn Hindi/English, and then go to a city where they will eventually have a minimum wage job for the rest of their lives and not know any indigenous knowledge systems. Did I do the right thing? That was my values and my need for meaningful impact, creating questions, saying like, wait, I'm getting funding from XYZ. Why are they funding me? So all of these questions start to think, and I'm like, I need to understand. So the role I chose for myself at that point, I wanted to just be an observer and not do anything. And I wanted to therefore get into the break of reflection, engagement, understanding. And I was able to do that because I also knew, I was like, I don't have any personal constraints right now. If I am to do it anytime in life, now is the time. And I did that. So that's kind of, I guess, the anchoring point I wanted to keep saying. All of these are the considerations that we usually go with. And what that translates into is, I'm just trying to make it real now. The career signature that you will have will look different. And Sandeep is a prime example of that. 30 years in IT and now evolving into the social sector. So within the social sector, there are people who say, I love the org I'm working in. I love the people I'm working with. I love the cause I'm working on. Same org, same place, doesn't matter. I am happy with the salary I will get. This is it. Then you have people who have seasons, who keep changing at whatever points of time. Probably I fit into that category where I want to stay somewhere in the sector, but keep evolving roles because personal situations might change, my understanding might change. Then you have the exact same story in social sector adjacent organizations, right? You might not be in CSR, but you want to work on responsible AI in Meta, your choice, right? But you keep anchoring on the choice, but you work outside the sector. The third, and this I'm seeing increasingly, is those who carry a portfolio of identities. More and more of my friends are separating their source of income from their source of meaning, right? So, for example, I have a relative who is an engineer. Her identity as an engineer is strong, and she is working in high-tech engineering. At the same time, she volunteers to fundraise and to get groceries to an orphanage or an old age home, right? An institution in the city that she's in. There is another friend of mine who has, we started out together at McKinsey, and he and I did good social sector oriented work within the firm. And he continues in the corporate world, but he has started on the side this, how do you collectivize and help match volunteers to social sector causes? I have benefited hugely from people who've deep experience of 30 years, let's say in consulting, or who've started off, but they always work as strategic advisors to nonprofits, right? So this friend of mine, the same friend of mine, he had seen that whichever city he moves to, he will find one good nonprofit and become a strategic advisor to them. And that is his Saturday. He has chosen discretionarily to spend a Saturday on that one. And of course, there are many different options as well. So for example, work in the sector, move out of the sector, make some money, come back into the sector, go out of the sector again, right? So you can also have this sort of move. And then there are people who do nothing, which I probably shouldn't be this, but like sometimes I ask a question saying, is it better that you don't do anything and like live your life without trying to do anything? Would you net come out better than pushing along in certain directions? So all of these are options. Closing this section with 3 things that I thought is also important too. Things but I wanted to also resonate with you on it, which is one, impact may not be obvious. You might be chipping away at something that is not fundable, is not something that you can celebrate. So for example, education, environment, health, these are all the obvious sectors. But if you're working on tribal rights, or if you're working on gay rights, these may not they are slowly up and down in terms of the social acceptance scale. If you work on loneliness, it is only now hitting as a problem, right? And there's always a lag between what you do and what it translates into. It takes time, and the attribution that you manage to do it may also be sketchy at best. Second, it may not be flashy. One of those things that I've also started to be more mindful of is just this realization that if you are getting applause, it's absolutely worth asking who is clapping, why are they clapping, right? What are their vested interests in celebrating your success, right? Where are they coming from? Because often applause comes from power structures, and people who have more power have a certain incentive, systemic incentive. I'm not talking about individual incentive, systemic incentive to continue holding on to that power. And you might just be feeding into their narratives. Like I once articulated for myself, I don't want to be a soldier in somebody else's war and not know what I'm fighting for. And the third is that impact may not always mean scale. There is this person I've spoken to on Raahi called Amit Sriyam. He runs this alternative community space, as he calls it, not even doesn't call it a school, called A Little Grove in Hyderabad. And his idea is that his question is, why can't we have curriculum design? And at A Little Grove, the curriculum is designed by the children. They all get together, figure out what they want to cover over the year, what they want to teach, what they want to learn. And he's like, I get it also that this is limited at 30 children. I can't do it at scale. But this is, I think, is meaningful to do. And he struggles with his own questions. It is a pay as you wish setup, etc., etc. All of us go through our questions, but for your answers may sometimes not look as scale is perfect, right? And most people in the room will know what the problems with this push for scale is. Yes, Vinisha.
Thanks. I'm just sitting with a question that I'm kind of feeling, okay. How do you, okay, for example, if you're in a point in your life where, say, your personal needs, like you said, might take precedence, you've got some decisions to make that are there, but there's also the sort of this lingering guilt at the back, saying I'm not able to work on that cause as much, or put all of my time in a role that's meaningful. How would you navigate that? I mean, I don't know if you need to answer that right away, but this is the question I'm sitting with. um, what do you do with that guilt, or how do you sit with that feeling of not doing something up to your potential, or
Tough one. And I think this is perhaps the most, I guess, the most central question that everyone walking in, I also sensed at the beginning, is holding. My take would be a few things, right? And a couple of these will come later as well. But one is also recognizing, hey, you remember that what best looks like every day looks different wala thing that kept going around once in a while. I'm sure it's turned up at least 3 times on your WhatsApp status. It's that. It is that it's not about giving 100% or like 100 in absolute value in every situation, but it's about the 100% in every situation, that I would say, right? Which is to say that, one, remembering that there is nothing called social impact. Ideally, there is only social change, which means that it has been ages of millions of people who have lived and died, who've come and gone, and you're not going to, akele one fine day, make the whole thing different. If I take the example of any person who we know from history, one, their accomplishments were not their own. They were often just the figurehead for it. Second, we might think that everyone knows them, but only a very small portion of the world anyway knows that they existed. Right? So the idea of absolute transformation of society, if we shift that to a systemic flow and trying to see what we can do in the space and the energy that we have for that flow, that has helped me a little bit to take that weight of the world off my shoulders, to say, actually, I am just one of many who can. And that helps. And I think this point that my friend made, and that I do want to share later, I'm bringing it up now because I think if there's one takeaway for any individual working in the social sector, he made this point that if we usually prioritize as work is more important than relationships, and relationships are more important than health, right? Like I need to help other people. What if you flip that? And that is the way you optimize. Health is more important than relationships and time with people that you love. And that is more important than work. Your compass is anyway going to lead you to do work that matters, right? Now, the question is, you have a lifetime of 5,000 weeks, but it also has to be worth living. We have increased lifespans, but low quality of living has been the overall trend that I've read about. So the question becomes, what if you invest in all of this so that you actually have that entire lifetime and get to play the part that you want to play, right? Which is self-care first, etc., etc. So I would say just anchoring on that, and that one concept of health more important than relationships more important than work has been something that it's not that I've gotten it perfectly, but just keeping that anchoring back of mind has changed how I make my decisions quite significantly. Vijay, Vinusha, I don't know how much that helps, but I hope it does.
So I think a deterrent for the social sector professionals to follow that kind of a flipped logic there is that there are always people who are willing to put work at the highest priority. So if I say my health is the first priority, then I would also end up losing a potential income opportunity, right? So it works like a capitalist, supply versus demand kind of a system there, and therefore, if I mean, I can, if I set the terms of how I want to work, then I would also be limiting the opportunities that I would get. And so people sometimes they're also they face this pressure to put work first and to perform there as opposed to prioritizing the others. What are your thoughts on this?
So I think these are two different things, right? So Vinusha, the way that I heard her question felt more like the problem is so big, how do I stop? In the sense, there is so much to do in terms of what I want to do, but I'm not able to give it my all. Vijay, now you're shifting the lens to say there are cultures, organization cultures, and people around me who expect me to put in more hours than I would ideally like to give. And there is an expectation put on me that for me to continue my employment with that organization or in that context, I need to be giving more than what, like putting my health and relationships at risk. So I think you kind of head nodded to the answer, which is look at it as a capitalist construct because most people working in the middle are working within the capitalist construct, right? You often are going against it only when you move to that mission first mode where you're actually doing what matters. I remember and the reason I say this is because when you stop seeing the organizations that you work with for, um, in terms of they are, as they are something separate from the larger system, and I have to give it my all, and everything that I do is in service of value. But see it as it is a vessel, it is the best vessel that I have towards my impact, right? But it may not be perfect, it may be also subject to the issues of the system. If you detach yourself from it to that degree and weigh it with your own lens of how much are you willing to give, that helps, right? And the reason I say this is because there are two options here. One, you think that this set of people, the cause, the role, and role expectations are working with your personal needs, are working with what you're willing to give, and you do it, right? Versus you don't think it's worth it and you need to find a way out. They both are options, they both are possibilities depending on your personal specific context. I remember being shouted at for working on a presentation till 3 a.m. because the point was it's not worth the grogginess you have the next day and not worth the impact on your health. The moment I got that from my manager was an eye opener for me because I'd never heard this before. I'd never been asked to not give it my all and put every comma in the perfect place. When you realize it doesn't matter and you still get to the objectives, right? I think it helps. And again, one of the underlying things is just one, if you enjoy what you're doing, try to be as good as you can at it, which is around efficiency as well as cutting off the extra that doesn't matter. Right. And see, again, this is in the context that you actually like where you are. You're just figuring out how to set expectations with the people expecting things of you. Right. And for me, it's always conversation, negotiation, asking how much, saying, hey, listen, this is what I can do. Does this work? Someone told me this point that an organization will take as much as you give it, especially in the social sector. Right. So learning to stop is a undervalued skill because often they don't want you to kill yourself. Right. And they don't realize how their whisper becomes a shout when a top speaks. Right. So I think that calibration is often then helpful to have explicitly. But at the same time, if all of this sounds like it's not going to solve the problem, you're probably in the wrong place. Right. So that might be what it is. You want people where you can balance better or have that conversation more comfortably. So, sounds good. I don't know, Vijay, was that helpful or not of words?
Yeah, definitely was helpful.
So maybe I'll just spend another just 5 minutes of talking at you to kind of land some of these pieces saying, yes, you figure out your role, figure out what impact you want to have. Now, what are some things that I would suggest you look to do that can help? One is that I can't emphasize this enough, which is keep a journal. The reason I say this is because our brain tricks us quite a bit. I remember where I thought I was happy in a phase of life at work. And my sister and my brother-in-law are like, listen, you were deeply unhappy, man. You have forgotten, right? And it's just you remember all the nice things and you've forgotten the difficult part, which makes you go back to certain work or career decisions that you may not have wanted. FYI, this is the set of journals that I have. Just for context, I have it here. So I've been writing since I was 13, I think. It began as a dream diary, evolved into just recording. And after a point, it became it was driving itself because when I look back, so preparation for any session like this or preparation for any interview often ended up being just reading my journals because ultimately after a point your technical competencies are not the problem. You need to know who you are, and for you to identify your values, what drives you, to make sense of the feedback that's coming to you at work. It often helps to have it documented because your brain forgets, your brain changes memories, right? And you can cheat your brain by writing it down. So that's one. The second is linked to a little bit of what I think, Vijay, to your question and what we were discussing. I think it helps to get better and better at your job, right? Like try to just be as good as you can at your job because ultimately, and it's kind of obvious, but the reason I bring it up is because when I ask my team members how split 100% of your time into planning, problem solving, communication, and coaching slash self growth, I have never seen more than 5% of time, and that also is rare. Usually, the self growth that I should spend time in the week for self growth is the aha for most people, right? And then we have a conversation saying, this is your current, what is the ideal that you want to spend? So, figure out how you enjoy. For me, it was very clear I am terrible at absorbing outside conversations. And so my way of growing was ended up becoming start my own podcast and go and have those interesting conversations in person with people, pushing myself a little to actually go and meet people like Amit, who I mentioned, like professors who I found interesting. To have those conversations and editing those videos makes me engage much more. And that has driven a lot of the perspectives that I have now shared with you, this is not what I would have told you 4 years ago. So it's been driven by trying to get better at the job. And like somebody said, the most useless thing to do is to very efficiently do what should not be done. So that also trying to figure out the system. And the third, I would say, is to read, listen, and engage with diverse perspectives. Learning comes from anything from an Instagram reel to conversations you have. There is this saying in Malayalam, which is Shuddhan Dushtane Bhalam, which is that the naive good ones can do as much harm as the evil ones. You have all for sure heard of the danger of a single story, Adichie's TED talk from 10, 12 years ago. Go back, watch that. Just helpful to remember again to that point that we had around impact and applause. Are you really making a meaningful impact? Are you doing the right thing in line with your values? Understanding the system, talking to people without judgment. One of the most and I go back to this. I remember I was in a bus having a conversation with a 20-year-old who felt very deeply about uh, about religious organizations, around religious hegemony. For me, the beauty of that was I was actually able to double click, and in that, because we were sitting with each other, not just be like, oh, I don't think religious hegemony is important, but actually have a conversation saying what drove him to those beliefs, and what are the statistics that he is listening to that drive his understanding, which opened my eyes to certain new perspectives that I didn't have earlier, rather than having that polarized worldview between him and me. So having those spaces and engaging with people, I find is important. And fourth is what we just discussed, which is making sure that your lifetime is worth living. That 30% of time that you have, it is driven by that 50%. If you do not invest in everything else, your personal life, everything that you do at work may not matter, right? And finally, and this is maybe the wrong audience to put more pressure on, but I just, again, since the title had the question around privilege, I think it's all of us agree that our choice to be in the social sector is partly driven by the privilege that we carry. So use it as you can when you can, and use it in the choices that you make. With every value that you put into an Excel or into a PPT, you can make those choices. And speaking up helps, and it doesn't cost as much because you have privilege as a shield. What I found helpful from a tactical perspective, or like in my brain expansion of preparation for this session, was, you may already know this, but there was this very nice detailed paper about the 5 phases of oppression, and I found this language helpful, which explained that earlier the word oppression used to mean it would bring images of tyranny, where you talk about conquests, and you are deliberately causing trouble for people, for a population. But in the 60s, 70s, that language evolved to be like, it is our daily acts or systemic unconscious actions and system design that make life harder for certain categories of people. And then it goes to explain saying there are 5 dimensions that you can see it through. First is exploitation, which is the classic capitalist concept of take labor energy from somewhere and get more for somebody else's labor and usurp it. Second is marginalization, where there are certain normative voices that are heard of the dominant population and not of those whose voices cannot be heard. And we know this conversation in the sector around whose voices end up getting heard and driving decisions. Third is powerlessness, not getting choice and autonomy over your what impact happens on your life. Fourth is cultural imperialism, which is your culture is not represented, shown, seen. And finally, the threat of violence that you face. Interestingly, this is only as of 3 days ago that I realized that privilege is the flip side of oppression. I never actually connected these two words. But once you do, it's quite interesting. When you say you are privileged, the opposite of having privilege is to have oppression, to be oppressed. It's as simple as that. And so if you look at these 5 and realize that in any of them, you are in the side of the privileged, it's helpful for you to then know what spaces you can then play with and bring in power. Just in terms of your survey design, for example, just in terms of adding that step of focus group discussion with people whose lives you're changing. This idea of having children decide their own curriculum, for example. All of these are ways in which you at least find ways to shape in your classroom or in your workplace whose voices are heard. And there are so many different contexts this can apply to, so I'm not even going to try to be comprehensive. but just wanted to leave you with that. So that's it, I would say. These would be the 5 things that I would say can help you most meaningfully engage with your impact. I understand today's conversation has been a lot of frameworks, a lot of words. I was hoping to bring in the color through the voiceover. And for me, if I recap, starting with the doers, payers, and intermediaries being the layout of the sector, the 5 points on the compass that push and pull as you make your choices, impact not being flashy, obvious, or necessarily at scale, and closing with these 5 things that can anchor and center you as you shape your own journeys. That's it, folks. That is all I had. Now we can speak about whatever you would like to speak about. Yeah, and then move to close. Has sent me a DM. Is that okay if I just share? I think it's all right to share. He was asking the question that on a similar trajectory as me, on a professional break, and the question is, how did I figure out my purpose? One, just for I think a helpful context would be I grew up in an idyllic suburban part of Kochi where um, the profit motive was very far from everything that I was exposed to. And I read a lot of books. And so from the childhood, there's somewhere this anchor of trying to do good was there. And that, of course, becomes amplified when you're in school, you're being the good boy. They want you to be more of the good boy, right? So that continued. At some point, the question also even became, am I being limited to the social sector? What are my other identities? So this point that I made around I should be spending time making music, I should be spending time doing other things, has also been part of the struggle of the question that Vaibhav, to answer your question, once I had that inner clarity, honestly, the way I could have the clarity was, or figuring out my purpose has always been one, these application forms to colleges and to jobs that you have to write, if you take those questions seriously, they actually become really hard. Like writing, putting it on paper forces you to bring clarity because you can't write unclear things, right? So I do think that keeping the journal is perhaps the most replicable process, I would say, that helps you to get to clarity of purpose. And in terms of what I would like to do in terms of my professional journey, at the moment I'm doing that portfolio approach where I get my exposure, learning, and engagement at scale with the sector through Dalberg, while I continue doing Raahi for my own fulfillment for those experiments that I would like to do. And ultimately trying things out is all that helps you to figure out what you want and don't want. So try and document is all I would say. So wrap up a bit all over the place.
Yeah. Like, thank you for that. Answers quite some questions of mine. But like, when you say that you should try, how to decide the direction that you want to try at?
Don't you have a sense already? Either the people that you want to work with, the problem you want to solve, or the role you want to play. One of these 3 should be clear. Some sense, 2, 3 options.
Got it. Makes sense.
Start from there. If it's people that you, again, I would definitely say if you can start with saying what is the minimum salary that I need as a starting point, especially if you're coming from a corporate background. And that will, I mean, are you willing to take a hit for 2, 3 years is a question worth asking. And then, of course, if you have a good corporate background, you always will have opportunities at least for 3, 4 years since you leave. I remember when I made, by the way, when I was on the break, and they were like, if you do one, I had a friend of mine who was in a consulting firm, and she was like, listen, if you do one more social sector wala job, then no consulting firm is going to hire you. Not that it's a bad thing, but you'll just be too old and certain doors will close because we've seen that it's hard for you to integrate with the consulting setup at that perspective. But if you do something that is climate aligned, etc., you have a door that opens. So I guess my point is start volunteering, for example, or just be like, hey, I want to help out your organization. If I can do data analysis, I can do PPT. What can I do for you? Do it in your city so you can actually go to that office 3 times a week or whatever, or once a week. Figure out if you like the people, pull out. Right? And that if you don't like them, pull out. Else go in if you really like what you're. If you haven't worked with nonprofits and you don't have any real experience or degree in MSW, how do you start or find opportunities? I think this would therefore be linked to the question of one, I don't think anyone needs an MSW to start working in nonprofits, especially in the context that we are all working in. It's unfortunately not a requirement to actually know what you're doing when you start. And for me, the answer would be just double down on trying something. Go have a conversation. So one, find people that you find whose work you find interesting and connect with other people. Go put yourself in places where you can have conversations.
Mine's an extension of the question that Vaibhav was asking, right? As in, you talked about just experiments and trying, right? Get onto the ground and try, and then you figure out. I also wanted to know what would be those limits to that experiment, if there are any. For example, when do you know that, okay, something is not, that you wouldn't want to invest further in that experiment, and when do you like stop and try? Because there's this, because I'm doing something right now and it's working out well. One part of me says, okay, you wouldn't know until you do this for X amount of time or X amount of years, and then you can make an informed decision. And at some point when, but how long is that is a question that I have.
There is one way to short circuit that, which is talking to other people who've done something similar. So, and it's a very silly point. I didn't fully get your context, but tell me if this answer first works, and then tell me a little bit more. What
I guess maybe not. Okay, for example, I don't know.
Tell me what you've done. I need more detail.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
More details, please.
More details, please. Okay. So I have been in this pursuit of building this sort of community of practice, and it sort of shaped, it evolved, and it became a newsletter, and it's great for my own learning. Okay, it's great for my own learning, as you did, like you said, right? You explore through your podcast, you're doing something. But I also know that it's getting effortful. Obviously, I'm not being paid for it, which was not the intent. But there is a lot there's a lot of effort and time that's going into it, and I just wanted to understand. I'm unclear on my direction for that, okay? And I think I'm trying to figure out when is it a good point to stop or pivot, or I think that's what I'm trying to figure out.
Okay, this is a good question, and this is a very relevant question. At least for me, it's a very familiar question that I struggle with Raahi. For example, I think what helps is to define what is a job it should do. Right? What is its role in your life is an important question to ask. And what do you want out of it? Do you want that to be? Do you like that as part of your identity? And how much do you want to give for it? Becomes just a calibration that you then do. It does, again, Raahi, I wondered if I should go full time. And then I decided I don't, because that'll turn it into another low cost consulting firm, which was not the objective. It gives me the freedom to experiment, freedom to keep engaged. At some point, it'll add up. So,
okay. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. In closing, I'd like to say one, just a simple plug saying do check out the YouTube channel, because if nobody watches, the value of having done that was kind of low. So just for context, I've spoken with a range of interesting people, as well as, so for example, the concept I'm looking at is public goods. I want to learn, but I don't know where to begin. So when I did my sabbatical, there was no reference point except one TED talk 14 years ago, which was completely out of context. So I had a talk where I spoke about what I did, read my diary, and then made that talk. And that I have put up as well, for example. What is a grassroots NGO? Wanted to kind of make sense of that. And at the same time, how do you do appraisals well? How do you run an engaging session? All of these things that I felt were what can you learn from teachers? Stuff like that, which I thought someone might find useful. I've put those up. You can find them on the channel. Thank you for this session to the TFI Alumni community of Tamil Nadu.
What felt powerful about the session was that it was a reminder. It served as a reminder that using privilege responsibly doesn't mean making dramatic sacrifices or perfect alignment. So thank you so much, Girish, for all the radical honesty that you brought. The incisiveness with which you conveyed and the finesse that you brought to the whole conversation. It was a deeply insightful session. Thank you, everyone. I hope you leave with at least one question or an idea that will guide you as you navigate your career ahead. So thank you, everyone. Please fill the feedback form and have a good weekend.
Thank you, Vijay.